Scorch Trials, Chapter 59, on this PDF, page 193. Teresa handed Thomas a really long knife, almost a sword. He couldn't imagine where she'd been hiding these things, but she now held a short dagger in addition to her spear. As the lighted giants stepped closer and closer, Minot and Harriet spoke to their respective groups, moving them around, positioning them, their shouts and commands torn away by the wind before Thomas could hear anything. He dared take his eyes off the approaching monsters long enough to look at the sky. Tendrils of lightning forked and arced across the bottom of the dark clouds, which seemed to hang only a few dozen feet above them. The acrid smell of electricity permeated the earth. Thomas looked back down, concentrated on the creature closest to him. Minot and Harriet had been able to get the groups to stand together in almost a perfect circle, facing outward. Teresa stood next to Thomas, and he would have said something to her if he could have thought of anything. He was speechless. Wicked's latest abominations were only 30 feet away. Teresa finally elbowed him in the ribs. He looked to see her pointing at one of the creatures, telling Thomas, making sure he knew that she'd chosen her foe. He nodded, then gestured toward the one he'd been thinking was his all along, 25 feet away. Thomas had the sudden thought that it was a mistake to wait for them, that they needed to be spread out more. Minot must have had the same idea. "Now!" their leader yelled, a bare and distant bark because of the storm's sounds. "Charge them!" A slew of thoughts spun through Thomas's mind in that instant. Worry for Teresa, despite the changes between them. Worry for Brenda, standing stoically just a few people down the line from him. And regret over how they'd barely spoken since being reunited. He imagined her having come all this way only to be killed by a vicious man-made creature. He thought of the grievers and his and Chuck and Teresa's charge back in the maze to get off the cliff and the hole. The Gladers fighting and dying for them so they could punch in the code and stop it all. He thought of all they'd gone through to arrive at this point, once again facing a biotech army sent by Wicked. He wondered what it all meant, whether it was worth trying to survive anymore. The image of Chuck taking that knife from him popped into his head, and that did it. Snapped him out of those nanoseconds of frozen doubt and fear. Screaming at the top of his lungs, he wielded his huge knife with both hands above his head and rushed forward, straight for his monster. To his left and right, the others also charged, but he ignored them. He had to, forced himself to. If he couldn't take care of his own assignment, worrying about others wouldn't amount to anything. He closed in 15 feet, 10 feet, 5. The creature had stopped walking, bracing its legs in a fighting stance, hands outstretched, blades pointing directly at Thomas. Those shining orange lights pulsed now, flaring and receding, as if the hideous thing actually had a heart somewhere inside. It was disturbing to see no face on the monster, but it helped Thomas think of it as nothing more than a machine, nothing more than a man-made weapon that wanted him dead. Right before he reached the creature, Thomas made a decision. He dropped to slide on his knees and shins and swung the sword-like weapon in an arc behind and around him, slamming the blade into the monster's left leg with a full and powerful two-handed thrust. The knife cut an inch into its skin, but then clanked against something hard enough to send a jolt, shivering up both Thomas's arms. The creature didn't move, didn't retract, didn't let out any sort of sound, human or inhuman. Instead, it swiped downward with both blade-studded hands, where Thomas now knelt before it, his sword embedded in the monster's flesh. Thomas jerked it free and lunged backward just as those blades clattered against each other where his head had been. He fell on his back and scooted away from the creature as it took 2 steps forward, kicking out with the knives on its feet, barely missing Thomas. The monster let out a roar this time, a sound almost exactly like the haunted moans of the grievers, and dropped to the ground, thrashing its arms, trying to impale Thomas. Thomas spun away, rolling 3 times as he heard metal tips scraping along the dirt-packed ground. He finally took a chance and jumped to his feet, immediately sprinting several yards away, but turning around, sword gripping in his hands. The creature was just getting to its feet, slicing at the air with its stubby bladed fingers. Thomas sucked in a huge gulps of air and could see the others battling in his peripheral vision. Minnow jabbing and stabbing with knives in both hands, the monster actually taking steps backward away from him. Newt scrambling across the ground, the creature he fought lumbering after him, obviously injured. Slowly, Teresa was the closest to him, jumping and dodging and poking her foe with the butt of her spear. Why was she doing that? Her monster seemed to be badly hurt as well. Thomas pulled his attention back to his own battle. A blur of silver movement made him duck, a wisp of wind in his hair from the swipe of the creature's arm. Thomas spun, crouched close to the ground, stabbing at anything he could as his monster pursued him, barely missing him with several more attacks. Thomas connected to one of the orange bulb growths, smashing it in a flash of sparks. The light died instantly. Knowing his luck had to be running out, he dove toward the ground, tucking and rolling again until he sprang to his feet a couple of yards away. The creature had paused, at least as long as it had taken Thomas to make his escape move, but now it came after him again. An idea formed in Thomas's mind, and it grew to clarity when he looked back at Teresa's fight, her creature now moving in jilted, slow attacks. She kept after the bulbs, popping them as they exploded in the same display of fireworks. She destroyed at least 3/4 of the odd growths. The bulbs. All he needed to do was destroy the bulbs. Somehow they were linked to the creature's power or life or strength. Could it really be that easy? A quick glance around the rest of the battlefield showed that a few others had also gotten this idea, but most hadn't. Fighting with bloody desperation to hack at limbs, muscles, skin, missing the bulbs entirely. A group of people already laying on the ground, covered in wounds, lifeless. One boy, one girl. Thomas changed his whole method. Instead of charging recklessly, he jumped in and took a jab at one of the bulbs on the monster's chest. He missed, slicing into the wrinkled, yellowish skin. The creature swiped at him, but he pulled back just as the very tips of the blades reached the jagged holes in his shirt. Then he thrust again, poking once more at the same bulb. He connected this time, bursting it and sending out a spray of sparks. The creature halted for a second, then snapped back into battle mode. Thomas circled the creature, jumping in and back again, poking, jabbing, thrusting. Pop, pop, pop. One of the monster's blades sliced through his forearm, leaving a long line of red. Thomas went in again and again, again. Pop, 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 sparks flying, the creature shuddering and jerking with each break. The pause got a little bit longer with every successful stab. Thomas felt a few more scrapes and slices, but nothing serious. He kept at it, attacking those orange spheres. Pop, pop, pop. Every small victory sapped the creature's strength, and it gradually began to visibly slump, though it didn't stop trying to cut Thomas to pieces. Bulb by bulb, each one easier than the one before it, Thomas attacked relentlessly. If only he could quickly finish it off, make it die, then he could run around and help the others. End this thing once and for... A blinding light flashed behind him. Then a sound like the entire universe exploding ripped away his brief moment of exhilaration and hope. A wave of invisible power knocked him over and he fell flat onto his stomach, the sword clattering away from him. The creature fell too, and a burnt smell singed the air. Thomas rolled onto his side to look, saw a massive black hole in the ground, charred and smoking. A bladed foot and hand from one of the monsters lay on the hole's edge, no sign of the rest of the body. It'd been a lightning strike right behind him. The storm had finally broken. Even as he had thought, He looked up to see thick shards of white heat start falling from the black clouds above.